Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen. Chapter 4 Thoughts versus Thinking. Thoughts are the energetic mental raw materials from which we use to create everything in the world. We can't experience anything without thought. It's important to know that thoughts are nouns and aren't something that we do, but something we have. A thought takes no effort or force on our end, and it is something that just happens. We also cannot control what thoughts pop into our minds. The source of thoughts comes from something that is beyond our minds, the universe, if you will. Thinking, on the other hand, is the act of thinking about our thoughts. This takes a significant amount of energy, effort, and willpower, which is a finite resource. Thinking is actively engaging with the thoughts in your mind. You don't have to engage with each thought in your mind, but when you do, that is thinking. Thinking is the root cause of all our psychological suffering. Now you might be wondering, where do positive thoughts fit into the picture? Positive thoughts or thoughts that feel good are not a result of thinking. They are instead generated by our natural state of peace, love, and joy. They are a byproduct of a state of being, not a state of thinking. We will go into depth about this in this chapter. For now, let's do a quick thought experiment. I'll ask you a question, and all you need to do is to be aware of what you are experiencing, and we'll review what happened after. What is the dream amount of money you want to be making in a year? Pause here and wait for an answer to surface. Give yourself about 30 to 60 seconds to think about your answer of how much money you want to be making in a year. Don't move on to the next step until you have had a decently sized train of thought about how much you want to make. Now take that amount and multiply that by 5. What do you think about this new dream goal for your income when we multiply it by 5? Take at least another 30 to 60 seconds to become aware of how you are feeling when you think about that and see what other thinking comes up for you as you feel your emotions. Don't move on until you have done the above. Okay, let's bring it back in and review what happened. After I asked the first question of what is the dream amount of money you want to be making per year, within a few seconds an answer popped up in your mind. That is a thought. Notice how quickly and effortlessly that came to you. After an answer popped into your mind, I asked you to think about your answer. What happened once I asked you to think about your answer? If you are like most people, you probably went on a wild roller coaster once you began thinking about the thought. You might have been thinking about how there is no way you can make that much. No one in your family is making that much money. You don't know how to make that much. It's stupid to want that much money, or that it makes you greedy. Notice how you felt when you were thinking about those thoughts. Most likely it didn't feel that great, but that is okay. I'll show you what you can do about it soon. This is a prime example of thoughts versus thinking. If I ask you a question, you will 100% have a thought that pops into your mind. Thoughts are not inherently bad. Remember that they are the energetic mental raw materials from which we create in the world. The moment we think about our thoughts is when we begin to get taken on an emotional roller coaster. When we think about our thoughts, we begin to judge and criticize the thoughts and experience all sorts of internal emotional turmoil. When I asked you how much you wanted to make, you had a thought about the amount. That thought was neutral and didn't cause any emotional toil. In fact, you might have felt expansive and excited. It was only when you began thinking about the thought of how much you wanted to make that you experienced the self-doubt, unworthiness, anxiety, anger, guilt, or any other emotion you may have felt. This is what I mean by saying that thinking is the root of all our suffering. Having the initial thought of how much you wanted to make didn't cause any suffering until you began thinking about the thought of how much you wanted to make. It is not necessary to think about our thoughts or to judge them. It does us no good to do so. We may think that thinking is helping us, but all it's really doing is causing us to feel all of these negative unwanted emotions and making us create reasons as to why we can't do it or why we shouldn't want it. The only thing that was useful and helpful was the initial thought that popped into your mind when I first asked how much you wanted to make. All of the thinking that happened after was destructive and unhelpful. Thoughts create, thinking destroys. The reason thinking destroys is because as soon as we begin to think about the thoughts, we cast our own limiting beliefs, judgments, criticisms, programming, and conditioning onto the thought, thinking of infinite reason as to why we can't do it and why we can't have it. Without thinking, we prevent all negative programming and judgments from tarnishing the initial thought of what you want to create. If I asked you for some ways you could make the amount of money you wanted, and if you sat there long enough, you would experience the same phenomenon of having random thoughts pop into your head of ways you could make it happen. These are thoughts of creation. Thoughts are inherently infinite, expansive, and energetically positive. You'll know you are having thoughts from the divine when you feel positive emotions, feel lighter, and feel alive. As soon as you begin thinking about those thoughts of the ways you could make the money you want, you'll immediately feel heavy, restricted, and limited along with a whole onslaught of negative emotions. This is how you'll know if you're thinking. I use my feelings as an internal radar that tells me whether I'm getting direct downloads of thoughts from the universe or if I am in my head thinking about my thoughts. You can only ever feel what you are thinking, so feelings and emotions are like intuitive internal dashboard which tells me if I'm thinking too much or not. If I'm having a lot of negative emotions, I know that I'm thinking too much. This is another example of how we are naturally built for success. Below is a chart that compares thinking versus thoughts to help you identify which one is which within your mind.